I'd definitely choose an A7 III with the 200-600. Well, hello and welcome to an episode of Camilla and I. Today I thought we'd do a shoot off between the A7 III and the 200-600 lens and the A9II with the 600mm. What a difference in price. So going by price alone, there's no comparison. The lens over here is about well, the cost of a small family car, and then you've also got another small family car attached to the back as well. Get my cars mixed up. And here we have basically an old banger in value price wise, so yeah, there's no comparison, so don't even look at the price. But if you're just starting in wildlife photography, I do recommend going for a full frame, because you can spend an awful lot of money buying APS-C cameras and then going to full frame, and that cuts out a lot of money if you go straight for the real thing. So I go straight for an A7 III in the Sony system. Obviously there's equivalents in Canon and Nikon, and you'll choose accordingly. So yeah, so straight away you save a fortune just going for the full frame camera to start with. So we have the A7 III with the 200-600mm, and yeah, what an awesome combination. And this clocks in around about the £3,000 mark, so it's not a cheap option at all. So you have to think twice whether you want to get into this game or not. And then of course we go to the other extreme, we go to the top end of the market, where we have the A9II, which is the camera of the moment, soon to be superseded by the A9 III, which very interested in. Shh, don't tell anybody. And the 600mm f4, the most expensive lens that Sony, I believe, do. So yeah, on price there's no comparison at all. But this is basically, I would suggest, a beginner setup, although it's still pretty good. And over here we have the advanced Pro setup. So the autofocus system on the A9II is absolutely outstanding. It's even better than the A9, which was incredible, and it's so responsive, it's so fast. So on this score, the A9II beats the A7 III hands down. It's by far the superior autofocus system, and indeed with this combination, the 600, it is lightning fast, as long as you can get it in position. So that's 1-0. Well, 1-0. That's 1-1 now, I think. Anyway, I lose track keeping score. Anyway, that's a definite plus side to the A9II. The focus speed beats the A7 III absolutely hands down. So something both lenses have in common, and that's the size of the megapixels in the sensor. I mean, the A9II is a completely different sensor, but essentially it's 24 megapixels, or 25 comes up on the computer as near as damn it. So yeah, both cameras, the A7 III and the A9II, are both 24 megapixel cameras. So technically you get a very similar image, and indeed I'll vouch for that, you do get a very similar image, and indeed on video there's hardly any difference whatsoever. Okay, the difference between the two lenses is the number of frames per second, and this is actually a key factor. A lot of people think, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, but it does. This camera is 10 frames per second and the A9II is 20 frames per second, and it's surprising, that literally doubles your count of shots, so it's well worth getting out your A9II. Just for that factor alone, it actually increases your shot count, which sounds silly, but it is a big difference. And the difference in this game between success and failure is very, very small. Ergonomics is another matter. The A9II is a step up from the A9, and indeed the A7 III still has the characteristics of the Sony more flimsy technical body, and the buttons are smaller. The ergonomics on the A9II are far superior and well worth it when you're out on days like today with the old gloves on. It just helps to get those fingers into position without mincing the buttons. So another factor to consider is the image quality, and indeed if you've got a static subject and you're only doing record shots and you're not really doing much movement in the shots, you don't need an A9II at all. You can indeed stick with the A7 III, and what a price saving. So yeah, I mean, image quality is superb with the same size. The size and weight of the two cameras are very similar, the actual weight of the camera body. Of course the lens weight is different. The 600mm weighs in at 3 kilos, and I believe this one weighs in at 2.2 or 1.8, to be corrected in the thing below. Yeah, so there's considerable weight advantage. I mean, it's difficult. This is the advantage of a lighter system. It's difficult to get in position with a 600mm, and obviously this is where the lighter setup would play. But obviously I'd pair the A9II with the 200-600 in a mobile situation, and indeed that's what I've done from this position for most of the Christmas period. I've paired the A9II with the 200-600, which gives me the advantages of both. But still, not to be put off on a static subject. You cannot, you know, get hard to beat the autofocus, and although it's not so fast, you'll still get the shot and you'll still get a very nice image. So do not despair, and it's still 10 frames per second. Wow, well, quick demo of the how awkward it is to get the 600 f4 into position. In the end I had to take it off the tripod and point it skyward towards the little tree creeper, but yeah, amazing. But to get, you have to be pre-positioned really with a 600 f4, and that's where the versatility of the 200-600 wins hands out. Of course the quality of this is superb, but we'll see. Compare results, because I took some very good shots earlier in the week of the tree creeper with the 200-600, not the 600. So I think you'll see it's a win for the 200-600. Well, it must be time for a coffee break on Camilla and I. Still no sign of that pesky kingfisher. So anyway, needless to say, look at the end of this video, because I did get it earlier in the week with the 200-600. Anyway, cheers guys. It is cold out here. I've got to have a coffee. Well, we've just got a backlit little egret in. Very nice. Usually a couple around here. And this one's decided to pose in the frost with a bit of backlight. Yeah, very nice. And we've got the 600mm trained on it at the moment, so even better. Better get taking some snaps. Well, this one should be in the best of the bunch, but even the best of us, I think we miss. I'm not sure. I think I've missed off the legs. Damn. 600mm. If only I'd had the 200-600 on, I could have zoomed out a bit. Oh, another advantage of the 200-600, flexibility, perhaps its biggest advantage. Ooh. Ooh. Damn. So in conclusion, if I was starting again, what would I do? I'd definitely choose an A7 III with the 200 to 600. You could probably get one of these for around the £3,000 mark, this sort of setup, as it stands at the moment on a monopod with camouflage and everything else. Second hand, possibly the body, you might be able to pick up an A7 III second hand. So certainly I would start with that, and for the reasons I mentioned earlier, I'd go for an A7 III full frame camera as opposed to starting with the ASPC series, although they are a very good starting point, and if you can only afford that, go for that. But if you can go straight to full frame, you will save yourself an awful lot of money. I went through an entire Panasonic system, GH5 or GH3, GH5, and I ended up full frame Nikon. So it just goes to show you take your pick and choose. I mean, the Nikon D500 with 300mm PF, certainly a very good starting point as well, but probably a similar cost to this one. Anyway, now I would go for Sony, and I'd go for the A7 III full frame with the 200 to 600mm lens. Obviously we're not comparing light with light here at all, and indeed most of the week in this spot I paired the A9II with the 200 to 600 because it was far more advantageous. It was far easier to get in with the monopod, and I was able to get shots that I couldn't possibly get with this alone. And I think I've already demonstrated how I've missed what potentially was an excellent shot of a little egret with some motion, some movement. And indeed I caught it again in flight a little bit later, linked in flight later, and again I think I just clipped the bottom of the wing off, which when you're dealing with 600mm so close to you in flight, that's the sort of thing you get. So that's the disadvantage you get with this sort of system. Of course, this was in focus, despite the fact it being a 600mm, the A9II was able to snap into in flight a white bird against a dark background, had no problem at all. And obviously that's the advantage, that's why you pay the big bucks. But you have to be in position. With this sort of setup, you've got to be there, you've got to be on the spot, and it's a fixed position, chosen location, and then this combination at 600mm does the biz for you. Obviously far better than this one, but if you're wandering around and you need to get into position, then you go for the 200 to 600, more flexibility. The A7 III, of course, you go from a cost point of view. It's a £1,200 camera second hand, 1600, 1800 new I think, and the A9II is still 4,000 plus camera. I mean, it's you pays your money, you get your choice. But yeah, I mean, if I was starting in wildlife, I'd certainly go full frame A7 III. 10 frames per second, not as fast an autofocus system, but particularly if you're just starting out or getting into static birds and you want to get record shots, the A7 III all the time. I wouldn't even think of getting the A9II. But obviously, if you're a complete advanced lunatic and you want the quality and the f4 nature of the 600mm rather than the f6.3 600mm note, 1.5 stops difference, it does make a difference, especially to that depth of field. And of course the lens quality, as you'd expect, is far superior with this lens. But back to the cameras, yep, 20 frames per second, 10 frames per second, 24 megapixels, 24 megapixels. Amazing autofocus, not so amazing autofocus. So yeah, the differences are stark. The controls on this one, easy to operate the controls on this one, not so easy to operate the controls on this one. Viewfinder, better on this one, not so good on this one. Number of pixels, number of focus points, more on this one, less on this one. but they still cover the full frame. An amazing system, the Sony system, and you'll still get incredible shots with the A7 III. So if I knew now what I know now, I would start with the A7 III and the 200-600 at the moment. Obviously Canon do the R5 and are looking very good as well, so there's alternatives to look at as well. I'm not a total slave to the Sony system, but now I have invested heavily in the Sony system. So I'm looking forward to that A9III, Sony. Do not let me down. Camilla needs to perform, especially against an R5. Be interesting to see if there's anybody out there who wants to put an R5 against the A9II. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, let us know if you've got the R5, Canon R5. That sounds amazing at the moment. The animal autofocus beats this system. Incredible. Anyway, watch this space for future developments on Camilla and I, and hopefully the latest equipment. We do like our latest equipment here. To keep up with it, well, these manufacturers certainly know what they're doing. They mean Camilla and I to spend a fortune. Yeah, and one other point I thought I was just thinking of there. Obviously, it doesn't matter. The best equipment in the world doesn't actually get you into the right place. And everybody thinks, oh, you've got this massive lens, you can get anything anywhere. Well, you can, but you can get some very blurred shots of distant subjects. You still have to get into position. So it doesn't matter how much money you spend. A 600mm is very useful, but you've still got to get the actual thing into position. And that's where the A7 III and 200-600 combo would beat this on most occasions. And indeed, if I was just in a competition with somebody and somebody was had this 600 with the A9II, I would pick the combination, the A7 III with the 200-600 over this combination, because of the flexibility. I'd get far more shots. Of course, the possibility of getting the outstanding shot is with this camera here and this combo, the A9II with the 600mm f4. That's where we're going for perfection and outstanding capability. But otherwise, in a competition, if I had to go up against somebody with this combination and an A7 III, I'd be worried. Oh, sorry. Swan taking off there. Never resist the swan in flight. Absolutely superb. Anyway, have a good one. Bye from Camilla and I.